This story takes place in 2005. 15 at the time, and nothing more than rebels without a cause. Me and James, who was like a big brother to me, always getting me out of trouble when I did something stupid. We grew up in a quiet and gated community, and our parents were always there if needed something. One night, we were on the way home from a house party. A little bit drunk, we decided to stop and smoke a joint. As we smoked and laughed about how awesome the party was, we noticed the neighbor, Old Man Johnson, was packing some large plastic bags into a van. We only thought it was strange because it was 11 o'clock at night, and how you never really saw the guy. There had been some rumors of what the old man did for a job, but most of them were just silly stories we as kids made up to scare each other. When I had the bright idea to play detective, we laughed and joked about it, and watched the old guy pack up his van and leave. We took the opportunity and headed over towards his house, sneaking around the sides towards the back. Old Man Johnson must have been the only guy on the street not to have floodlights or CCTV. As we entered the back garden, we noticed one of the basement windows was open, so we took the chance sliding through the window. I went first. I tried finding something to stand on. I slipped and fell. James quickly came through the window and checked if I was okay. I softened the fall with my arm, but I just laughed it off. James pulled me to my feet, and we started looking around the room for a light. As the light flickered on, a table with strange stains on it came into view, numerous freezers, some of which had padlocks on them, and a small incinerator towards the back of the room. I noticed the steel gullies on the floor, leading away from the table and towards an old drain in the floor. The odd thing we noticed was the smell of the room, like it was constantly bleached. The room's odor actually burned my nose and made my eyes water. James grabbed a hammer from the shelves and walked over to the freezer. I quickly asked, "What are you doing? Let's just get out of here." James laughed. "You wanted to play detective, right? Let's take a look. I mean, who locks their stakes up away, right?" The padlock fell and clunked into the concrete floor. James placed both hands on the freezer's lid and turned for the dramatic effect. "You ready?" With a grin on his face, he lifted the lid quickly, and suddenly the grin disappeared from his face. He went pale white. I had never seen James scared before. Never. He grabbed the lid and slammed it shut. I asked what it was. He replied, "We need to go now." At that moment, the door at the top of the stairs opened, and an old gruff voice, "Who's down there?" James grabbed my hand and gave me a boost up to the window. I climbed out as quickly as I could, turning to see James just halfway out the window. Then I saw his face change to absolute panic. "He's got my leg!" I grabbed his hand and tried with every ounce of my strength to pull him free. I couldn't. I just wasn't strong enough. James' hand slipped, and his last words to me were, "Run." I quickly headed around the side of the house and ran as fast as I could to my house, and I burst through the door. My dad came out of the kitchen. "What in the hell are you doing bursting through the door like that?" I explained what had happened. At first, my parents thought I was joking, until I broke down and said the guy grabbed James. My dad called the police, and they took about an hour to arrive. They entered Old Man Johnson's house, and shortly after brought him out, placing him into a police car. I'll never forget what happened next. The ambulance arrived and brought James out on a stretcher. I ran over to him and tried talking to him. I noticed the cuts and other wounds on his face. He looked like he had been in a boxing ring. My dad held my shoulders and said, "Come on, I'll take you to the hospital." As we walked past the police car, I looked up and noticed Old Man Johnson sitting there with a grin on his face. He mouthed the words, "You're next." My mom had already called James' mom. And when we arrived in the waiting room, you could see she was devastated. Her makeup was a complete mess, but I couldn't blame her. I couldn't even sit down. I was pacing backwards and forwards, going outside every 10 minutes for a cig. My dad actually took the cigs off me at one point. That's when I heard it, the scream of a parent who had just lost her child. It was blood-curdling. It echoed through the halls of the hospital. It was like a wounded animal. James' mom had fallen to the floor, and she just cried and cried. I walked over and asked the doctor what had happened. He told me that James did not make it. The police investigated the house, and over a couple of weeks, the story began to leak, as they were there nearly every day for 2 weeks, loading up bags of stuff and taking out items. That's when the local news reported a serial killer had finally been caught. Old Man Johnson had been killing, dismembering, and getting rid of bodies in his basement. The reality of the situation made me grow up fast. The freezers were used to store what Old Man Johnson called in his interviews his meat cutlets. And when they finally got around to asking him why he did what he did to James, his only reply was, "Kids these days have no respect. I taught him respect." Old Man Johnson was sentenced to life in prison. His house, after a thorough investigation, led to 50 unsolved crimes. Finally being able to be closed, it was demolished. There was a little memorial in its place for the ones who had lost their lives. I placed Jamie's favorite book there every year on his anniversary. I'll never forget he gave his life to save me. If I could, I'd take it back, but I am grateful for what he did for me that night. But at the end of it, I lost my brother. I look after his mom now. She's like my second mom. The effects of the entire situation has pulled the community apart slowly, and it's just like every other place now. Nobody trusts their neighbors. In loving memory of James, you will not be forgotten, brother.